So, I've been trying to get this Ozark story out for like 2 weeks. This is the hardest story I've ever encountered trying to get it out. So obviously, it's important. I have had people come to my door, tell me I'm the devil, and all sorts of things that have stopped and tried to prevent me from sharing this story because it's like a continuation of something that happened when I was 18. When I was 18, I tried to get my name changed. I tried to go to court. I tried to testify against certain people in my family. Well, that didn't happen. They came to court. They stopped me. My father had this master plan and sent me to a psychiatrist. I was in the backseat of a car with certain individuals and watched how everybody, basically like a pack of wolves, turned against each other in the family and against me, singled me out. So then I was reprogrammed and put back in. So before I get into that, though, I just want to share a few things with you. What people hide and deny, for one, will end up dominating them. So it's really important to clear sometimes the deepest wounds to go into in deliverance. Those are the most important. And the ones, it's like we have all these doors, and any door that the enemy has opened up is like an access point to us. So sometimes it's hard to get to those deepest weeds that we pull out and close those last doors. But that's the last part of final inner deliverance to bring you to the next phase in life, is to close all spiritual doors that have ever been opened so that God Almighty can bring you to the next level of where you need to be. And what I've learned in this whole process is that if you choose Him above anything and everything, any person, your whole family, whatever it is, then you're honoring Him. And when you honor Him, He'll honor you. And it's your choice. And for those kids who didn't have parents, like we didn't, the kids that were involved in the secret access programs and USAPs and the 80s kids, the Lord can come into that place where we had all those spaces and times of abandonment and had to learn how to take care of ourselves and had to learn how to take care of each other, and show us what His protection really looks like and how we can emulate Him through His characteristics and His divine parentage. It's more than anything that our earthly parents here could have ever offered us anyways. So He'll show you so much more, and He'll show you how to parent, how He can be your parent. And He basically showed me that He's like the cradle of all civilization, the cradle of life, of course, but He's also this cradle of mercy and this cradle of grace too. And He just wants us to come and lean on Him and cry on Him and abide in Him in any moment and let Him parent us and grow us and nurture us so that we can be a tree in His garden, not just a seed anymore that He planted for a certain mission or purpose, but to get to the graduation point of it all and what it was all about. So He wants you to abide in Him, and He will draw you out if you are one of His chosen ones, one of the elect, and you won't listen to any other voice. You can trade in that spirit of heaviness for a garment of praise and worship. You can trade in all things, all pain. You can trade all of those ashes for beauty. And He'll literally transform you and destroy the old self and give you a new spirit and a new heart and chisel away any stoniness that's in that old heart of stone. So He'll literally make you a new creation. So seek Him while He's yet to be found. And before I get into the Ozarks maze, I'm just going to touch base on the epitome of what Torah really is. The final curse of the Torah is condemnation in the eternal court of judgment. The Torah brings wrath, Romans 4:15, because it defines sin. The Torah came in to increase the trespass, Romans 5:20, that man might be made more aware of his sin. So it's a process of unfolding self-awareness too, and the sin nature of the human, but the law of sin and death was overcame. The first Adam went into it, and the second Adam brought us out of it, which was the Messiah, Jesus Christ. The ministry of condemnation, 2 Corinthians, it's called 3:39. The condemnation, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So those who are truly in his body and whose face he shines with, there's no condemnation. Those curses don't have any effect over you that people try to prevail over you with or anything like that. It's like oil on and water. It just goes off, melts off of you. You're free in Christ. For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free from the law of sin and death. For God has done what the Torah, weakened by the flesh, could not do by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin. In the likeness of sinful flesh. He condemned sin in the flesh while he was yet in the flesh, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. So then God was satisfied in that judgment where he took upon the whole weight of the world's sin. That the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Romans 8:1. When Messiah came, he accomplished what the Torah could not accomplish in the flesh. All right, so we're going to get into the wilderness of Oz and deep mind ops in finding light in Oz. So let me turn this around so we can focus. So this is a story about the father of lies, the master of deception, how the devil works through my own family with black projects and spiritual learning curve that God, the Father of all truth, tested me with to find him at every angle. It's about how those in Christ have no condemnation and every curse, no effect. It's about breaking through the cocoon of MK Ultra monarch programming into the glory of Yah's light as his newly created creature that no one can touch. What people hide and deny will end up dominating them, and how to break free from any of those habitual patterns and generational curses. So in the early 80s, there were many shadows of Montauk like happenings in the US. And one of those places, these places followed me. It seemed to be like in the heart of the Ozarks. So in the Ozarks, my grandparents had a spot at the Ozark Resort at this place called Rockaway Beach, Missouri. They've been down there for many summers, many years already, and it was this like exciting adventure and a long journey in this old truck camper that we had. And by the time we got there, it was a little disappointing because they didn't like their little cabin on Duck Harbor. They were talking about this town and not coming back and how it was kind of shabby, but then everybody decided to kind of make the best of it and stay and visit. And this cabin kind of smelled old and musty, and there's these strange little tiny houses scattered all over this trailer park-like looking village that was sitting on a hill. And I made some friends with kids that were riding bikes around, going to the pier and the park area, playgrounds. So it was a good day, and my grandma was letting me fall asleep on hers. She was singing the song to me on the steel bench on the dock and told me that the dock would rock you to sleep. So it was like a Rockaway dock at Rockaway Beach, and you could hear like the little waves crash. And it was a good memory because you felt safe and secure in her arms. And then you'd hear the benches rocking and creaking into the sunset, and it was a good scene. So then the next day, she seemed anxious. She wanted to leave the place. This woman was a born-again Christian, and she didn't want to stay there. Her spirit was trying to warn me and her that something bad was going to happen. So they moved out of there to a better place. But then some reason we just stayed there. And I was then brought by some of these kids to these tiny houses that were scattered in this circle. And there was another little building across the road on Venus Avenue, and it said police on the sign. So I thought that was weird because I didn't see any police cars or or a policeman. I only saw this white van that was there. And then this girl asked me if my parents, or she asked me to ask my parents if I could spend the night there. And there was this ragged Native American woman with this long black hair in one of those tiny white houses. And they had like little hearts on the side of them and pink shutters. So it looks decent. You know, it looked alluring for little girls, especially. I didn't realize at the time this place was a women's crisis center that women and kids were going in and out of. And there was something that just felt terribly wrong with it. And these women were smoking cigarettes outside their porches. And I was trying to leave this house, but the woman kept blocking my way. And she was like really stern with me. And I tried to sneak past her, but then she'd like grab my arm and she was trying to tell me to call her mom. So then I got separated from my brother in this village. And then I ended up that night staying there. And then this strange man came into the room at night and ended up tying me up in the dark. And the woman's like banging on the door and he's telling her to go away. And he looks like a warlock. He had dark hair. He was part of this programming that went on in the Ozarks that seemed to be an extension in my home life of Montauk. They knew they had me because I already had a lump in my throat when I would try to like ride a bike around and think about stopping at a house or asking for help or something, because there was things that were going on there at Rockaway Beach already that would like freeze me, and then I would just like stop riding my bike and not think about asking for help and go back to where I was. And they use this as a tool. They use silence. It's a big tool for them. It's the enemy's mouth actually that needs to be shut up and bound up, because he knows that we have authority to do that. And we need to take back every inch of ground that the enemy stolen from us in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach's name. So the Lord led me by the hand and did this for me like step by step this year. He's been the most faithful and sure thing in my life and the strongest force I've ever been blessed to experience. And the next day there was two men that came to my dad and they'd given these papers about this like special camp in the wilderness. And the man had on a Boy Scout leader uniform. And one of these roads in this village was called Boy Scout Road. So this guy seemed like he had all the credentials and talked a good game. My dad was already no stranger to mind control, and he was told this place wasn't far away. They'd just show us the place and bring us back, and he was welcome to come there. And it seemed like they were doing this like weird dialogue. And my father even signed papers off for us. And we ended up in this white van that was parked at the police station with these kids that were going to a camp that basically never existed. And I kept thinking, like, I'm too small for this. Like, why am I even going with these Boy Scouts in the first place in this van? Like, these people seemed like they were, like, scouting for kids more so, and it was not a survival wilderness camp for recruits. So we ended up at Shadow Rock Campground, and this was, like, very alive and booming back in the day. There was, like, hundreds of campers, basketball courts, this motel, a 2-story bar that was packed with these rednecks and hillbillies. And then I noticed this was sitting in the background there by the woods, and it said Boy Scouts on this faded peeling paint part of it. When I went inside, it looked like old jail cells were in there. And then later I realized that this Boy Scouts leader had the key to the building, and then he made the girls stand in one line on the steps going outside, and then the boys standing in another line down the steps. And it seemed like kids were disappearing or something here. When the park was closed, they had the kids brought in by train and even used old systems from old amusement parks and had human trafficking operation going through the backwoods of the heart of the Ozarks. So I'd skirt past this crazy old Indian lady that was at the village, and she was at this bar, and she was upstairs sitting on a chair. It's like a rocking chair in the 2nd-story building, and she'd look out the balcony and like scream weird things to me as I passed her. She was always drunk. So when I was little, I actually had nightmares of this woman, and I pictured her as this like old witch in a rocking chair at Rockaway Beach that was like rocking children away and taking them out to the water or having them disappear somehow. It was very creepy. So the Boy Scout guy took me in a back upper hotel room, and I've always had discernment of spirits and knowing what's going to happen next, preemptively, like precog. So he has the spirit of fornication that came into his eyes. And then I called on the Lord's name, and then I felt this wind come in, like a rebukal. And then the glass window that was behind me that I was standing in front of him started cracking and broke, like the wind shattered it, and then that stopped that from happening. So then we left these Cookville villages, this one place I'm talking about called Shadow Rock, and in the back building back there, I could see that there was like bloodstained walls in this abandoned building, and there's old curtains in it, and these terrified kids were standing by the door there. So it was like really early morning when we went there. And then I was taken to a man I'll call Willie's house, and he seemed also to be an early handler of mine. So the Boy Scouts leader, actor, I call him, front man for all this shit show charades that went on down there, just kept playing out. And they went on for years down here. And he lived at 22010 Highway 160, Kissy Mills, Missouri. And at the end of his driveway, he had a chain on it. And I'd go there sometimes with him. I'd usually be by myself, like outside with a dog or something when he'd go inside. There's a red fence there too. I'd just like be outside playing on tractors or trailers while he was in his house doing stuff. But I'd spy through the window sometimes to see what he was doing. He had this blue tent at the end of his driveway, and he said it was in case one of the boys needed a place to stay or something. So then I have this routine that I started with him. Each time that I was brought there and left in the Ozarks with him, he'd take me to like certain dirt roads, certain places. We'd go to a car wash. At this car wash, he put me in this white station wagon that had this really hideous, like stupid foam, large booster seat. So it almost was like a nylon booster seat, I guess, so that I could actually see out the windshield as tall as he was. So he tried to terrify me. He'd like do like shitties in the parking lot, get me to act sexual for him, and then would stand me in the back of this building on the stone ledge that was in the backyard off the parking lot. And it overlooked this big drop that would go way down. And you could see like, it was like a valley, like all these trees. And to me, I was so little, it looked like this cliff at first and this hole where I could like see the tops of the treetops. So in the distance, you could see this white tower up ahead. And then when you'd put your feet on that ledge, he'd say he was going to throw me off. So I just learned right then to focus on the sunshine at the top of the trees, the white tower, the image of this angel I would picture in my head catching me if he would push me, so that it would be like this net that would hold me suspended, and that the angel would like laugh in his face at what he was doing. So it was spiritual warfare there in this valley, and I felt like these sinister forces that were suspended in the air that would have loved to come down and devour me if he did throw me into this valley. Like they were gathered and waiting there for the final push of his drugged out, insane mind to do it or something. So I would pray at that moment. I'd ask Heavenly Father to save me, and I was never pushed over. I felt the forces of goodness win each time, and he didn't like that too much when that happened. And then when he knew that like he couldn't terrify me anymore as I grew older, he smashed the front of this car in. He like drove it into something that was concrete, and then he put a pillow in front of me. So because he did that, I knew like he'd never kill me, and of course wanted to keep me as all of these games continued, and I saw through all them as I got older. So this person I ended up just hating with a passion, and so I just ended up staying with this person all the time for some reason. My father would drop me off at this place. I was bored out of my mind. Sometimes we'd get out of town, go do something else. When my dad drove me here, he'd sometimes stop at my aunt's house to tell her to call my mom and tell her we were on our way home even. So I was usually so traumatized I barely would say anything. I didn't really look anyone in the eyes. And I was just kind of in my own world. So this Willie character, after the car traumas, would take me next door to this restaurant each time. And since I'd shut off my vision to not see this cliffhanger, because I thought I was going to get pushed off this cliff, it was just hard for me to see my food at that point on the plate. I think he also used some kind of mind control tactic to try to mess with my vision and hearing too. If I didn't act up, then I could go into the restaurant, and then I'd be able to see more clearly or something and eat the meal with them. But I remember I couldn't really talk to anyone though. And then he has this friend at the car wash that would always be like storing things in a storage unit, and he helped him put my trauma on display. And what they did is they hoisted and welded the smashed white station wagon up on this pole for the whole town to see, and it said Wet Willie's Wonder Wash, which of course had sexual connotations to it. And my father would instill this programming and always laugh about giving me a wet willy in my ear. So every time I would drive past this car and these places in this crazy village, I'd just feel frozen or go into altar usually. So then this guy started taking me to his mother's house, which had this black steel gate and a long driveway on the corner of Walnut Shade and the highway. And she was making excuses for him. She'd tell me more lies. Then I'd also be brought to Palisades Avenue in Forsyth, and this man would bring out a white bag of pills, and apparently he was the town pharmacist back then, like way down towards the lake at a dead-end road. And then this woman from Walnut Shade really liked my father and his satanically complicit altar that always just told us to be strong. He was always testing to see how strong we could be. She ended up giving him all these pills, and this was a stop before we went home usually. And then she talked to him by the fireplace in her house, and we'd be sitting at the bar in her kitchen, and then she'd trigger his altar, and this altar of his would come out and like start revving up like a bull and get all worked up, and then he'd look like he was going to headbutt you or something. He'd get a crazy look in his eye, and then they'd go into the bedroom usually. So then me, my mom, and my brother would be out in this car waiting for him sometimes, and we'd tell my mom the same excuses each time. Then my dad would get in the car afterwards, and he had his bag of pills with him, and it's like he was still raging at this point, and he would he'd grab the steering wheel and like he started shouting and screaming, and my mom would just like casually turn over to him with her neck and say like, "Are you insane? What's wrong with you?" And then her jaw would drop and she'd just shake her head. Like that was just her thing to do with the situations. Sometimes in altar and routines like this, people end up just usually saying the same things from what I remember. But it's like a thing that they do to comfort themselves. But my parents were never really happy together, and I think his guilt made him stay with her too. And when he got in the car at first, if we tried to calm him down from driving like a maniac, because he started driving crazy, we tried to take his pills away when he stopped to pee or something. He would like literally get out and attack us. He would choke my mom on the road in front of us. He'd choke me in front of them. We'd like have a screaming match, shouting at each other until he calmed down. And then me and my brother would be silenced in the back seat of this car because this instance also triggered our fear of also being in the car in similar situations with our grandfather, because my grandfather did adrenochrome and would lock us in cars, play satanic music, and rape us, and also traumatize us with driving crazy. So we would just be in the back seat, like looking out the window and look frozen, basically. We just pray that he calmed down eventually, because he would drive crazy. He'd scare us. I mean, sometimes it lasted for a couple hours. And in many situations, he'd go to the extreme with things. He'd be addicted to spirits of torment, and he'd always do things to the extreme to scare you to death, to make sure that like we watched horror movies with him at home. He'd look at the clock sometimes, and then he'd take a pill at certain times. And then at another time, after we hit the Wisconsin border line going north, then he'd just change his mood, tap the steering wheel, sing calmly, or like start whistling and just act like he was back to normal. So I would take the pills when he wasn't looking, and I would actually throw them, and then he'd get frantic at first, but then he got confused and he'd adjust to it. And my mom would just call him a maniac. And I remember her miserable state of mind when she was at a campground in Danville, Missouri for days. And it was like, it's like we would go camping and then wait for this psycho underneath his skin to manifest at some point to terrify us. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. Back to the agent from Walnut Shade, she ended up coming to our house several times. And one time it was after what went down at Graham Cave State Park. And this woman actually made us burn all of our pictures of Missouri in the fireplace so that no one would get in trouble, she said. And then she'd like storm into our house with these folders and start yelling at us, triggering our child altars, like, do you know what this word means? And slamming papers down like she was a lawyer or something. And do you know what this word meant? And she was always acting really stern and threatening and screaming at your face a lot. She tried to like call out certain altars and a lot of legal jargon, trying to scare us all the time, but it stopped working after a while. This woman was a real piece of work, and she thought everyone could be handled effectively. So I ended up writing my stories to her and gave them to her in envelopes before we get memory wiped. And then I'd tell her to her face, if you have a heart, you would tell the world my story, what happened. But I knew she wouldn't. She just seemed more concerned with protecting her own ass, covering things under the rug, her sick obsession with my father, and protecting all the crimes against children or whatever was going on that she was aware of or directly involved with. And, you know, so many people protect these scumbags that are employees of our government, and it's exactly why WikiLeaks and Q exists, to inform the public of their reasons and treacheries against American civilians. It's been going on for decades, the research, and how all these swamps need to be drained in the southeast Missouri quadrant, especially, and other parts of the country too. And how we really need anointed churches to be put in certain spots so that God's people can reclaim those areas and what was taken from them. And it even goes down farther into Arkansas, where Aleister Crowley and his minions did cave rituals and then left all their debris and bad energy in a lot of places too. And it's just remnants of spiritual warfare, because they operate like shadows and they come and go, and they seek to steal, kill, and destroy, just like their father. And they're always covering their tracks. So back to Kissy Mills, I'd be taken to Kissy Avenue on a dead-end road, have like random sexual trauma done to me, altar switching, baiting. My father started trapping me in cars there, and I felt like he was going to choke me to death each time. I'd also be taken there, and I'd be taken to this place called Bark Hole Road with Willie, and he'd start barking like a dog, saying we're going up this hill, up the Bark Hole. Then I was taken to this long blue building before the Kissy Mills Bridge, and it was called Davidson's Court Cottages. And it was like this long trailer with many doors connected through it, because the doors worked on the outside still back then. But if you go to this place now, it just radiates pain. Video camera feed line inside of it, and that was connected to some house on the hill in Elk Creek or to somewhere else. I'm not sure, but it was a dump back then. It's abandoned now. It was like trashed inside, and several kids went in there, but not all of them came out. And then there was this blue outhouse outside and a dirt parking lot, a porta potty. It was before the bend to this fishing spot. And right before we passed this blue house, my dad would put his hand on my leg and squeeze it and look at me and say Kissy Mills or something that would make me freeze and make me go into altar. It's like I would have to brace myself for like however long I'd have to stay at these places, what would happen after these points, etc. Everything in these areas looked really swampy, really flooded. It was like sinking and sucking up all the bad energy there. And these towns and areas were at one point part of the buckle of the Bible Belt, but these sinister forces came in these strongholds and then caused all this damage and wreaked a lot of havoc in the 80s and 90s there. And it's why we speak to the ground and reclaim anything that was lost and anything the enemy's stolen, and drive out those forces in Yahushua HaMashiach's name and put his blood covering there instead. The Lord can send a revival to any dark place and turn any bad situation into his good, no matter how far the enemy's gotten, how big the chains are, and he can claim a certain territory for himself. And the angels are sent out and commissioned to do the work too. So there's still spiritual forces at work, and I knew that they'd never snuff my light out. I always knew that, and that God just would keep healing me over and over. So in this building, Willie would take one kid into the back room and shut the door. I'd be playing in this next room with like these weird broken toys and junk and like this white board that had our names on it and stars. And then they would gag you or duct tape your mouth. Then I'd run sometimes through these doors to the end of the building and try to get out, but you couldn't get out that end door because on the outside they had padlocks and they had rigged it up. And then at the very end, in the back room, there was Alpha Kino Dog, ringleader himself. And he'd sit in this black chair in there, and it was like this test of some sort to get past him. And then he'd turn around and he had this like pasty white vampiric face and a smile that only Lucifer could perfect. And he would tell you to say something up to the ceiling camera, and then he'd like cut your finger. And this was when I first met him, and then also battled him in the Green Nazi training room at Montauk, which is what it means as being sealed in a lifetime of silence on that patch, an arrow patch that's alive from the pit of hell. My brother was in his underwear in that back room. Another man was holding his arms back. I remember him looking at me like he didn't know what to do or say, because I'd stand there and I'd have the standoff with Aquino in that chair. And then I told him to say, I looked over to my brother and I said, say, Jesus is God, or Jesus is here with us, or something like, I love Jesus, or anything like that. And when that happened, our energy together would go up in the air and lighten us, and it would make us safe. And then they'd let us go after a while. So together we were a force to be reckoned with, but he lost that. And he turned away from the Lord 20 years ago. So the pit, there was also a pit down in the Ozarks that these people tried to throw me in, and it was a place called Murder Rocks. This Murder Rocks site that's a path and has these elephant rocks there. The pit that they tried to throw me in and the silence they tried to suffocate me with is nothing compared to the pit that will swallow them and bury them and cover them when their souls are destroyed in a lake of fire. Alpha has always been very occult looking, even as a kid. And he'd tell you to say things in the camera. Like I said, he duct taped kids' mouth. He killed some in that room. After this was over, I would then be able to get past his black chair, because he literally had this spiritual force field in front of him that would not allow him to hurt me. And I would go out the door and past his black aura, his heaviness, and I just like fall on the grass outside in this muggy sunlight. And then my handler, Willie, would come around, grab me, take me behind the building. And there was this little short trail that had a stream of water, or he'd like have a jug of water with him. But then it's like this guy would be as nice as could be. He told me he didn't like Aquino either. And then he would snap me out of shock or stupor that I was in if I was freaking out. And then he'd tell me to look him in the eye, and he'd make me wash my hands in the creek, and he'd calm me down and say like, look, your hands are clean. Look, it's okay. It's just part of the training. Or he'd say certain things like that. But I hated looking at him too. It was like always, you had to choose between one of the two evils with every situation that you had to choose there. So then it was like he'd give me a hug and say I got a star on the chart inside. And it was one of the most insane things they did to us, trying to normalize Satanism. They'd even take us to that building at night. I remember when it was like extra spooky. There would be this TV in Aquino's room playing. Sometimes it had static, but then sometimes it would be horror shows. And they ended up programming Captain Howdy from The Exorcist into my father one night, who was standing there like a zombie. And that whole place is just a stain on the land, and it's a sight for sore eyes, and it should just be burnt with holy fire, as well as the things that they put on display around that whole area. It's beyond sick, and these people are beyond help, and they need to be put down out of their own misery so they can't touch another child again. So I know that Alpha got to my father because he was tranced, and he just kind of caved in, I think is what happened, because when he saw what they were doing in that building, it's like he just so easily gave in. He was easily programmed and would look into the camera and say what they wanted him to say. So I'm sure he has a spirit of death attached to him too, from the adrenochrome. So what I would do is I'd run across the road and I would hide in the grass while Willie would call my name, like looking for me. And then I would just start rocking myself. And I remember I just looked up in the sky and I cried out to God. And I was like, I just want to be with you. Why won't they let me be with you? Why do they hate you? You're so good. And so on. I just couldn't understand why nobody wanted me to be with Jesus. What was the big deal? Why couldn't they have him? Why wouldn't, maybe they never met him? I was thinking all these things. Like if they only knew. So at the moment, I just felt like dying. And then I felt this breeze come down and touch me. And I looked over to my right, and sitting right next to me was this figure in a white hood, and it was translucent. And his face was looking right into me. And this apparition said that he was an angel of the presence, and that no one saw what they did to me, but that the Lord saw it all and sees it all. So that made me feel pretty good. And that he said, just like no one could see him because they were in darkness, I could see him because I had light inside of me. So I saw this angel's inner jewels, and he was straight from the throne room. It felt like from the goodness of our celestial parents' bosom. And it was like these gold flecks were radiating out of thin air, and these wisps and encrusted glory light, like jewels that were coming out of nowhere from his body. But it was like they were still cloaked and hidden in him, though. Like they were enveloped and folded within him. Like, I don't know how to describe it, like quantum waves or something. But his glory light was like this wave that washed right into me, and it just made me whole and clean. Like I've said before, like battery reset head to toe. And I just wanted to stay in that forever. And he showed me in my mind, like these vials of elixir that they had were death, like a poison, like an aroma or this fume. I was never to touch it or it would rot my brain. And he showed me many other things and restored purity right in that second. And my mind, he restored everything. And he showed me that the Lord already sees you as your full potential when he looks at you and shines his face with you. And through Christ's blood, we can be blameless. But most of all, he showed me how it ends. He showed me the ending of many things and that they lost and were losing anyways. And he had this soft, white, glowing face, and he spoke calmly, but with an authority I'd never encountered in life yet. And I just stood up after this direct encounter with him and promised of the Lord. And I felt like this tall tower that had like grown, fully charged, and the biggest smile radiated from my face. And I knew I had help from on high. And even if no one knew it, it was real. And it was the coolest thing I'd ever experienced. And it was dazzling and glorifying from another whole world. And it was mine to keep. They couldn't steal it from me. So I'm thinking like they have their secrets, but I have mine too. And this angel says, don't ever renounce the Lord. He'll protect you. So I knew if I didn't turn my back on him, he'd never turn his back on me. And I had this treasure box in heaven waiting for me. So the next time I had to face Alpha in the back room, when he turned around in his chair, he wasn't so scary anymore each time. When he told me to look in the camera, it wasn't so hard each time. I mean, it was terrifying. Most kids wouldn't have been able to make it through it. But every time I'd say, Jesus Christ is God. And then he'd look furious, and I'd have a veil of protection over me in front of us. Our eyes would lock. We would go into spiritual warfare, engaged. He couldn't attack me or harm me. He'd try to get up out of his chair. He couldn't move. He wanted, look on his face, it looked like he wanted to kill me, but he couldn't. It was the spiritual battle. Me standing there and him trying to get out of his chair. And this frustration, an invisible force that was like we were do-si-doing around each other or something. He did manage to cut my fingers, though. That's all I remember him ever doing to me, but that's as far as he got. Because it was really dizzying standing there holding on to the Lord's image in my mind while this like external sheath or energy was in front of me, contending with him, like a line of defense placed as a hedge of protection around me. And he was trying to break into that. And he hated me for that. And it seemed like everyone was trying to break into me and use me my whole life for something. So I must have had something valuable inside because of that. But all those people, I know they'll be buried eternally in all their sins, maggots covering them, the lowliest things of the world upon them, because the word of God states that, and there's so much more justice that he can do that I could never meet out here. And they get you at a young age. They silence you. Silence and fear was their favorite tools. And we break those off and those blockages with the love of God. And that will bring us courage and victory in the work of the cross. And then we can cut through all their lies, all their ties, all their illusions, all their spell casting with the sword of the Spirit, and have the shield of faith in front of us that's actually bigger than our entire body, moving and advancing us in each directive. So we can hear the mandates from heaven and actually listen to the captain of heaven's armies and be a soldier in that. And these abominable entities will actually walk over because they're like insect-like entities that inhabited these people's bodies and will eventually end up crushing their heads, as we are ordained and called out to do and commissioned to crush serpents' heads and walk over tails of scorpions. And all things they've done in secret and covered with their tracks will be overturned, found out, and be brought to the light. And their evil dwellings will be demolished, their own terror turned back on them, with all of the curses of Deuteronomy beating against their souls and crushing their spirits. And the tables are turned now, and the hunters are becoming hunted, thank God, because this is his work and a cleansing of these parasites from all our nations, because they're vampires and they're bloodsuckers. They're after our kids, they're after your children. There's no recovery or rehabilitation for them, and most of them are reprobate anyways. And their punishment, according to Torah, is to have a millstone tied around their neck and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, if any of them were ever sorry, they confess what they've done and ask to be killed, because they would know that they deserve that. Knowing under Yahweh's law, they're deserving of that death. So as we get older, my father was still under heavy mind control that started in the military. He would take me and my brother to meet them. We always call these people them, this group. And then he'd leave us with them at Hercules Glades Forest. And if we'd ask him who they were, he'd just say like, oh, you know who they are. And then look away like, don't ask me again. And he was afraid of them. He said that they were nuts. Oh, they'll kill you. We just ignored him most of the time because we didn't really respect him at that point. And he just had one excuse after another excuse. And he was good at covering up his own tracks and siding with them and convincing people to cover for him and covering for them too. And this place is part of Mark Twain's National Park, and it's this thick, dense, secretive woodland. And not a soul goes there. I mean, you could hear a pin drop out there. I called it the Forest of Hercules. It was a beast of its own. It had like hundreds of trails. Hannibal was another city I was taken to with the whole Mark Twain story. Tom Sock Mountain. They left me out there for punishment once. I remember I could go down this hill to get a drink of water and go to a certain point down this hill slope, but then I had one jacket and a thin blanket in the fall, and it was cold, and I was under drone surveillance that would come check on me. And then there was this huge water reservoir that was down in this valley you could see that looked like this heart shape. And I just remember sitting up there and trying to be hopeful and pleasant, and then picture like manna falling from heaven in my time sitting out there, because I had many, many times of solitude for days out in the middle of nowhere in woods. And then also there was a guy with a rifle that was standing like at the bottom of this place. So I knew that I couldn't go past like a certain point. They did lots of very weird training with us. We walked back down the trail. We'd have backpacks on times at meeting points. One time we couldn't even drive down some trails because my dad said that like, they didn't want him to, and they wanted us to walk, and he needed to save his gas and stuff. And even if he did bring me and my brother to do something fun, like go swimming or something, he would always have to put like some type of training in it. Like we'd have to carry our inner tubes a mile away out of the way to get to the place or something. He always had to ruin every type of fun that we think that we could have. So we'd like trigger him a lot and get him worked up and mad. It was a very resentful and very strange relationship I had with each one of my family members. But the men that we'd meet there, they had guns. They'd meet us. Even though my dad would bring a gun, he was somehow scared into submission to still do whatever they told him and make excuses for it. They played him like this puppet, and they had him wrapped around their finger, it seemed like, because he had a different personality that would come out, and I hated him for what he did to us. And it was like forgiving him over and over to save the family or some type of blackmail or prison sentence they told him he'd have hanging over his head. whatever they do to scare you. They told us all different things. But me and my brother hated these guys, and we wanted to take them out even by the time we were 13. And we could have, but my dad told us not to. Because he'd walk away back up this trail to the car, and we'd like shout out pussy at him. And then he'd put on an act sometimes, like he was crying. So sometimes I felt bad for him and then run and give him a hug, but very strange relationship. And then he'd pick us up later eventually. But I don't believe he ever met the Lord, and he didn't have any spiritual garments on or armor on. He chose a lot of what happened to him. So in the movie Winter's Bone, it's a lot about my family, how my brothers attacked me, and I was 18, and I was going to go my own way and expose everything. They attacked me in the driveway, threw me in a car by both my arms. I felt betrayed by everybody that I had grew up with. It was hard. But a lot of these people I hung out with in Missouri showed me everything about Missouri and how much better it was than Wisconsin. But the character in Winter's Bone is the father is also depicted as like my father's cold alter persona in the series Ozarks too. His wife also gives this like crazy evil eye, like my mom always did, constantly to anyone that came around us that she found threatening. Because my mom would be with, and she witnessed a lot of things, but she'd just stand there with her arms crossed and give you this evil eye and the silent treatment for days on end. And they actually took a picture of her standing in that pose. My dad felt like partially my trainer too, that told me to go like when certain events were starting or happening, like this proud showman, chauvinist that, and they even put like a cowboy hat on that character, and they put a cowboy hat on my dad too. And what they did to us when they programmed this altar in him is they put like this stem of field wheat in his mouth that he would chew on, and then he'd start talking coldly, and he'd carry a gun with him, and then he'd greet everyone with a howdy. And one time when he came out of the woman's house on Walnut Shade off Highway 160, she actually came outside with a camera and had my parents standing next to each other because they were both an altar, and took a picture of them like she was gloating about it or what she was doing to them and everybody. And I just remember standing to the side, and I looked at my mom like my mom looked like she would have killed her if she wasn't like held back by some unseen force. She was giving her the evil eye. And it's probably the reason why my mom always said like she hated my dad with a passion, and all these subconscious things that would always come out. And him and my mother would always fight at campgrounds about things that didn't make any sense. She'd always call him a chauvinist pig. They had a lot of drama. She'd always be like this broken child, like he'll never let me do what I want to do. It was like a yo-yo type relationship with them about who was more disturbed. But her side of the family and what they did to us and his doing just evened out. I just thought, well, they're just both as bad. One's not better than the other, after all. And I realized that my only father has always been my Father in heaven. And my earthly father, these parents really weren't meant to be my parents. They were meant to be more like a victory. There's testing spirits, families that you can be born into, that you break off and make your own tree with. And this earthly father I had was part of the SRA programming. He was more damaging than what anybody knew, or what I realized as an adult. And it was actually blocking my relationship with my Father in heaven, and with healthy relationships with men and many other things, and keeping me back from him. And the Lord just opened up my eyes, showed me how unclean and disgusting these people in my family were on the inside, and that it doesn't matter what they perceive themselves or portray on the outside. He just told me, like, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to have anything to do like with any of those people anymore. And he'll make you like this tree that's like branched off, grafted into his tree of life, grafted into Israel. He'll pour his living water into you in spirit and grow you into something totally new. And, the people that still would be unrepentant of being involved in these programs in SRA is like what the resurrection of the damned is made for, these types of people. And I just had so much hatred and anger and resentment and betrayal going on my whole life that I just wanted my older brothers to beat my dad up like all the time as revenge for all the times he blanked out and was so brutal with me. Like, I thought he was going to choke me to death many, many times, even from the time I was like 5 years old to about 13 when I gained control. And they were close to that once until we got intercepted and silenced again. One time, me and my dad ended up at a huge house in Crane, Missouri, and there's this narrow wooden bridge that looks like you have basically an inch of space to go through on each side of the car to fit when you go underneath it. It's just so tiny. No large vehicles could get through it. So then my dad would rev up the engine, turn and look at me, and then he'd go really, really fast underneath it, and the car would squeal. And he loved this game. It was like they loved to torture me in cars or something. And he'd even turn around and do it like 3 times sometimes until he was satisfied. And I just closed my eyes and I thought my body was going to be crushed every time he went underneath this wooden bridge. And I couldn't look at the side of the car to see if we'd hit or pass through. Because one time he knocked off the mirror on the side of it because it was so close. And then I'd try to sit closer to him on the driver's seat, but then he'd shove me over by the door again. I mean, he could have killed us, but I just thought his bad side that randomly appeared and disappeared and tormented me my whole childhood. So then we go to this big house. There's horse gear everywhere, and on the walls there's this big pool inside. And I'm in this upstairs room that had 6 rooms and a long hallway, and I was blocked from going downstairs until my father was ready to see me, they said. And this guy in a suit was blocking my way down the steps. He ends up dragging me by my feet down the hall. I was in this dress and tights, and just locks me in a room. So then I'm sitting in the room looking out the window, not knowing what the hell is going on. And so I pray this prayer that this house would be a place where no kids would be hurt, that it would be the safe place, and that Jesus would come there. So I said this prayer upstairs, trapped in this room. And even though it didn't happen that day or many days there, it did eventually later on happen. That prayer was answered. And the Lord showed me every single prayer that he answered. And what they did is people rebought this place, turned it into Whispering Ponies Ranch, and it's for abused kids to have equine therapy with. And the Lord does come there now and meets them at camp every time because he really loves and cares for the children. And when I went back to this place and found that out, this woman told me as I was standing upstairs that they have tea parties for sexually abused little girls, and they tell them that they're princesses in God's kingdom and how much Jesus loves them. And I'm standing there and tears just come into my eyes, and the Lord whispers to my spirit, I heard that prayer. And this is how the active, intimate, working relationship with the Father works. He really does hear you and meet you. And he helps the children. He defends the helpless and he fights for them. My brother in this whole situation, he lost a lot of faith, and I really felt bad for him sometimes because when he was abused once back at the Blue trailers, I would just hear a sweet little voice say like it didn't work because he was too scared to say what I told him to say or something. Because I'd always tell him to believe in God's power, but it was about believing and knowing him that made it work, and exercising faith like a muscle. So back to the farmhouse, this horse house, I eventually got taken downstairs again, and since my dad's altar was too scary for me, they made him into Captain Howdy, and this was supposed to be like a friendlier version of him or something. As I go into this room, he's sitting on a horse saddle with his boxers on, and there's like this reptilian man in a suit looking at me and him. And then my dad's hands start waving in the air really strangely. I don't know what they did to him. They probably raped, drugged, and tortured him too, but I don't really feel that sorry for him because anyone put through the programs a lot of people end up making it out okay. And they do come out fine, and they don't end up torturing their own children. So they call them howdy hands, and it's why it shows in the movie Winter's Bone them cutting off the hands of the father too. So we go on this like wooden buggy around the barn over and over and over and over and over. And the guy in the suit was in between us. And then we'd stand in front of each other and we're given instructions on how to view each other. They had a gun at his head and they'd say they'd spare his life if I consented to this or that. And I thought, well, if I say yes, then he'll save my life too. So we did this reciprocal thing. They did the same thing with me, a gun pointing to my head, and he consented. Then we'd get a pill, and then we're off like this programmed couple on a mission. The acceptance of their games was usually forced by these mind routines or whatever they would come up with guns. We thought we had less control than them each round until we went along with it. Like we thought we had no choice, or we had saved each other's life, or some sort of ultimatum that always put in front of us. Like we always thought we had to do what they said. And they love these mental games. So they'd send us off, and then sometimes they'd spy on us in the woods because we'd go in this car. One time we stopped in this creek bed, and they were videotaping us or taking pictures, I saw. But the real truth is that their threats weren't real. They would get in trouble if they ever threw us under the bus, because I was awoken enough then to track them, know who they were, how to retaliate against them, and still be aware of what was cognitively going on. Even though I phased in and out a lot of times and it took me a long time to break through the cocoon, what they did was sometimes they'd give you a drink too. Like they put a drink in your hand after you'd take a pill, and then we'd end up in this like state of euphoria. It was like this test. Like we were in this cowboy type Wild West state of euphoria. And we'd pass this town called Billings, and I actually thought that I was in Montana for a while. And I went into a gas station once to get something. I asked for directions at this gas station and how to get out of town, and I was really surprised when the lady behind the counter told me that I wasn't in Montana. So I had certain reality checks, and then I would, like I said, phase in and out in the programming. So we went through this drive-through zoo one time. We went through a creek that had these like long swinging vines, like a foliage. He tells me to get out, get naked, swing on these like a wild woman, swing my shirt out the window. We were like just acting wild and crazy in these characters we were playing. If I didn't go along with what he said, he'd like reach for his gun or his knife and say something threatening. So then I go through a DQ drive-through once where we were headed back up north. I'd come to and I'd realize like what actually was going on. And then he'd get irritated with me if I broke down, if I said real things that would break him out of his altar too. Showed real emotion, just all the trying to break through. Because what happened is that he took advantage of those situations, because when the drugs wore off, I saw that he enjoyed what he was doing to me. And if given a chance, I believe he'd probably do it again, or he wouldn't have stopped. And I recall things that were said in parking lots and gas stations. Somehow my mind filed a lot of things that were said, and it helped me to keep gaining ground in this maze. Otherwise you lose yourself. But I knew in my spirit that God wouldn't let me be captive forever. So what I would do is like I would try not to take the pill next time they would hand it to me, or the drink, or pour it out. And then when we stop at the certain points again, like the creek or certain cities or roads, I try to do something different. But it's like when you are that heavily programmed, you're trying to run and break through a glass window in yourself. So you have to psych yourself up for it and constantly put red flags and tabs and reminders in your own mind to do this, to set yourself up for gaining control of your entire mind eventually. So we went back to this one spot, the creek. Howdy was sitting on the same large rock watching me. What I was doing is I was praying to get the strength to stop sinking back into these altars, which are really just demons that shift around in you, and have God's light come in and out of the situation, and that the sinking situation that I felt like I was in that left me feeling like mortified would end that day. So I went over to him. I started walking over there. I looked down at my muscles, like the sunlight was shining. I looked at how trained I was. And I just shoved him flat off this huge rock onto his back in a second, because I was strong and a super soldier by that point. So I pretended like I was running, but then I turned the corner and shoved him off of this rock really fast. Then I end up putting a knife to his throat. I get my point across. I start screaming and declaring, like, "You're not Howdy, you're my father. Understand? Do you get it? You think I'm scared of guns?" Because before this, he would like literally push me through the woods sometimes with his gun to my back or shoulder or a knife. If I wasn't complying, he'd always go for that, like go for his leather belt or go for that. And it just made me cringe every time I saw it. So after attacking him, I felt like I had victory over that. I started shaking violently. I spit in his face. I kicked him in the chest, and I punched him so hard in the chest it left this huge bruise. I could hear this demon in his blood too sometimes when his chest got close to me. And then I ended up stomping on his hands too, almost breaking his hands. He couldn't move his arm on the drive back. He had this Band-Aid on his neck because the handler came out of the woods and stopped me from actually killing him. So yeah, that was a victorious day. I ran to him from the back of the creek, had a running start, used my chi, knocked him off his base, off the rock, did the sharp turn, attacked him. He was like laying down there gagging and choking for breath. But he got the message. I warned him. And at that point, he knew that I was in control then, not him. So from about age 5 to 13, he was successfully my handler. But after that, I was more in control. And it was more the suit handlers than my own family members, like my father. So he still took me on car rides and places they wanted me to be at, but he never touched me again. And if he even tried to touch my back or anything, I'd just snap at him. And most car rides were much quieter, and our alters weren't like acting out and interacting like they were before, because our alters would actually be cooperating, is what happened before, to hurt me. So at home, an alter, he'd take me to the woods at night with his gun. Sometimes he'd rape you, choke you with a large leather belt. He was trained in a lot of different things. And the art of sexual manipulation is whispering in the ears a lot, touching the thighs and chest and other certain things that I noticed. But a lot of things that are spoken over you, you have to cancel out and clear, because a lot of times they did speak a lot of things in your ears when you were conscious and unconscious. So then after he would do this abuse, I'd go up to my room at home. He'd come up there afterwards and then instill this trauma by screaming what a wacko I was. If I started recalling these experiences later on, he'd call me a wacko too. And then he got the rest of the family to also call me a wacko. It was like their favorite word. If anything really hit home or was true, it was just, oh, I swear to God, she's nuts. She's just a wacko. That was their favorite word. It was their defense mechanism of mental and emotional abuse that they used to hide behind. So they did this to me to get me to not... Okay, the suit handlers, the CIA, they did these things to me with my own family to get me to not want to be with my own family, but to be with and choose them more. But neither choice was freedom, because we were still all stuck in it together. So it seemed, and it's why it's called Black Projects, Black Sites, Black Budget, etc., because it's like a black hole that you keep falling in, and only the love and the light of Jesus Christ can break through that and pull you out one step at a time, if you believe that he's the Messiah and can do that and work for your good for those that love him. So I got through to a lot of people, and they didn't like that. They had my dad in many training scenarios to make me more cooperative or consoled, but it really didn't help, because it just grew my feelings of despising and resenting him more. for his direct involvement. Like he was preparing me for the drills, like some trick pony that was ready to take off or something, like a pride show on target. But then it just grew tiresome after a while and became more like this ball and chain. Because we would always go places, we'd be camping somewhere, but it was never really camping. No one knew we were there except for the hidden eyes and the veils and the fog sometimes that hung over these regions and these glades and these just hidden places we were taken to. My dad knew everything that went on, what he was told for the time that he could stay. He knew everything. He was briefed on everything and debriefed. We knew a guy that had a mansion also on a hill and Elk River, and he seemed to know about us too. And sometimes it was like a relief to go there, and we'd swim. He had us on assignments. We'd leave this house. My dad would be driving, and then he'd say like, "Oh, I just can't figure out where he's getting his money from." And then I'd be in the back seat, like nonchalantly saying like CIA or something, mocking like that. My dad would look at me from the rear view mirror and like say like, "Oh yeah, right." Like he'd always like laugh about things and then just continue babbling on, even though our experiences made no sense to somebody that would have come and observed us. So then I just started calling my dad by his first name after that. My mom also could never figure out where she was. She could never remember where she was, how to get back to any of these places we had her stay at or took her. I almost feel sorry for her and felt sorry for her and how we manipulated her until I remembered her and my father's altars working together and the things that they did. She was kind of like a broken pet. And she believed a lot of the lies that we told her and why we were at these places. And she was drugged. Some of these instances in these like ghost campgrounds or parks that we just like randomly pull over and stay at. One time, like she just started sounding all crazy and she started holding my arms above my head on the bed in the camper. And then my dad would play some sexual games with me and look at my mom and say like I was better than my older sister. It's like the CIA turned them into these rapist hillbillies as part of my programming, and I just thought that was unforgivable. So the handler would be outside, my parents would be standing there, he'd trigger them, my mom would start coming in, grabbing my hair, hold me down while screaming things. They were both really, their demons were really bad. I can't even describe what they looked like. My dad would sound like this monster and he'd start growling really close to your face and like snapping at you, and then he'd start sniffing you, and then they'd sound more crazy as they went along, and if you tried to struggle they'd get louder and louder. And then in other instances he'd make me pose in certain ways and pictures too. So I had to throw out most all my pictures that I still had. He would call my leg this chicken thigh, and I'd freak out in the camper knowing basically that I was this prisoner and I wasn't really on vacation with these two psychopaths that loved to torment me on the inside, hold me back from happiness, and keep my programming intact. So it's like they were my prison wardens. And they'd be in this camper in the middle of nowhere, like howling in this camper, hooting and hollering like crazy hillbillies, saying I was never going to leave this place, and then leave the camper. And then I'd completely like break down after what they did. Because my mom would literally be like closing my mouth and I'd have to bite her fingers, try to hit her in the face, but it made her demon altar more mad. And after this happened, I feel like running, but I never knew where to go. Because most times I didn't know where I was. But I'd come out of the camper and then this handler would be standing there and he'd look at me and kind of a smirk on his face and say like, "Oh, what's wrong? Is everything all right?" And then look at my parents and they'd be like sitting at the picnic table who were calmly playing this card game called Canasta and starting to make a picnic. And then he'd look over at them and say like, "Keep her there." And then he'd drive away for a while. So then I'd be like mortified trying to eat food with these people who just turned into psychopaths and locked me in a camper. And you never really knew like who to blame in this constant shuffle. So I usually just sunk back into myself until I could figure out more sometimes. And then my brother would be told to walk around whatever spots we stopped at while this happened. And then it would be his turn. And that's how controlled we were. We're like on this leash. So, and I ended up resenting my brother so much for staying with them. He was so strong and so good when he was little and protected, when he was unrepressed, and when he had moments of like full clarity and scales fell from his eyes and his heart. He was a powerhouse, but they just shut him down over and over again. And my parents made sure that he went right back on track, and that we'd be right under their thumb. They try to stomp out our happiness, putting on a good appearance on the outside while suffocating our spirits and draining us until we felt like dying. They're just very selfish. They only care how people or children make them feel, and how their appearance grows because of it. So in these spots we stopped at, my dad would look for me if I ran with a gun, and then the handler would come around also and look for me with a gun. So I'd hear them trying to call me out. When he came back, this handler at this one spot, and then I would go into his car. I'd sit in the front seat with him. This guy had dark hair, and then then he'd be nice too. Then he kissed me on my forehead, made it seem like he was the good guy then. Offered me all this stuff, told me that my parents would never rape me again if I did what he wanted. So basically, I'm surrounded by these liars, cheats, manipulators, evil people. They constantly shuffle the blame to somebody else. They never take any responsibility because all they're doing is the devil's work. There's no truth in them. They don't perceive light. They operate in the darkness, because the truth is that we choose every decision we make, and it's why we need our imagination sanctified, the mind of Christ, the helmet of salvation on. We choose if we let demons into our bodies and minds and hearts. We choose how we respond to evil inclinations and temptations. We choose what we do to our temple. We choose how to treat others and what we receive and don't receive. And most of all, we choose the Lord of hosts, God Almighty, or we choose the God of this world, who is Lucifer, the God who's also the God of Mormonism. My mom ended up having an affair with a Mormon man. She also held a knife to a woman while holding her hair back by a camper trailer once, because she thought this woman was flirting with my dad. Like, her hair would stand up on her arms. Her demons were that strong. My dad also was sleeping from the woman, the agent I told you from Walnut Shade, while my mom was outside in the car. So at this point, I just realized they were both just as bad. And that's why I tried to escape when I was 18. They both weren't good people. My dad hurt me far worse than my mother, though, because he shifted that resentment to her, and he was in charge of everything, and he made it seem like she was more the crazy one. And he let her take the fall for a lot of things. He's a master manipulator. And then he'd start acting like really pitiful. So then everybody would feel sorry for him. And if I ever confronted him about everything, he'd play mind games too. And then everybody would go against me and say, "Oh, what did you do to your father?" And it'd act like he was the victim and nothing had ever happened to me. So basically, when they got me out of court and I couldn't change my name and get away, I was forced to go to a therapist's office and then got reprogrammed. And it's like a canning jar was on my head and they sealed the lid up shut tight again. But I realized that my parents were taken over long before I was born. And they also did this to my brothers and sisters. And I rationalized and thought, like, oh, they'll get better over time. Like, I had every intention of locking them up too, because they deserved, I thought, to rot in prison for all that they did, even if they weren't altered. But I was silenced. They didn't want my dad's military secrets leaking out, so they kept good tabs on it because he was so intimately involved and he saw so much of it. And the family's demons would just be like this whirlwind if anybody fully woke up. It was crazy what happened. They just rise up against you, and then I'd have to shut their mouths again and again and tell them to go to hell, because they would literally lash out at you. Everybody hated me when I was 18, and told this whole story before, so it's like total deja vu again. I mean, they literally walked past me and spit by me when we went to a church event once. And they'd just be like, what did you do to your father, et cetera, et cetera. And then they turn around and act like I was the bad guy. It's typical like gaslighting, gang stalking, wolf type pack behavior. Like I was the one who gave him a heart attack or something because I could see exactly what was happening. And I've had that gift since I was little, of clarity to see things how they are, how he played everyone. But I'm not a victim, first of all. I've been set free by the blood of the redeeming lamb. I'm under God Almighty's covering, whereas they still aren't. So then I ended up giving these people a second chance time and time again. But then I'd remember what they did to me, and it just never worked with the relationship, because what my dad would do is like his demons would come over to me and he would literally push your shoulders down really hard and whisper things in your ear. And I remember him pushing my shoulders down a lot, holding me in places with those howdy hands, making sure I was scared to death all the time, and that the fear would set in and that you would perform well in all the situations that you're put through. And if you didn't, they acted like it was my fault. Like it was my fault that we were in all those situations, and they would get in trouble because of me. So then they started blaming me. So with the hillbilly rape scenario and the campers, the second time they tried to do that to me, I wasn't so shocked because I was more prepared and I was strong enough to fight them and run. And then I told my handler in the car, in the suit, that I'd join them if I could help people. So then what he does is he starts testing me on these recon and extraction assignments, which ended up to be a nightmare that I can't go into because it wasn't in this country. But I figured if I got away from him, then I'd eventually shift to another agency and see and talk to the next chain of command or something. But I learned that relying on my own strength didn't work, and I had to rely on Abba Father's strength to get out. So my handler takes me to Kansas City. He brought me, he buys me all this nice stuff, takes me to these places. We had a good day. It was full of no worries, no cares. He even put my parents up in a hotel. Their camper broke down at one time. He got their camper fixed. My dad told me not to call him. I had his card because he's like, well, then we'll be running around like chickens with our heads cut off and not know how we got home a week later or something. That just seemed to be normal for us. My mom was being really nasty to me at this point. We were basically stranded at this hotel by Kansas City. Her demons were manifesting. I was sitting by the pool and I was praying silently by the sun. Okay, then she snaps her head over at me and just turns to me and says, oh, you think you're so righteous, don't you? It was like running over towards me. My brother would usually just be like in his own world. So I ended up calling the suit, my handler, from the hotel phone, because I knew that my dad had no money to get the camper fixed and they were really stuck. So I told my brother to call his handler too and get the hell away from my parents, at least for a day. So we both end up leaving this hotel. I go into one car with a guy and my brother goes into another car with a woman. I mean, really what I should have did is called like the police, Child Protective Services. But in my head, I just asked God to get me away from them just for a while and let me do something good and selfless and overcome these the agents and suits, the handlers, and show me how to do it. So God eventually did help me through that, but it took a long time because it was hard being involved with them for so many years. And when they get you from the time that like you're even a toddler, it's even extra hard. So they ended up turning out to be harder to deal with than my parents, though, because I didn't think about, because with them, I just totally shut down and gave them all of me. I didn't think about emotions or anything. It was like you were basically a doll that would be shut off and shut on, and then they would just like put back a piece of fragment into your eye and make you wake up or go to sleep. But God was speaking to me through all this. He was still pursuing me. He told me that I was never meant to be my parents' daughter. I was only meant to be his daughter, sent from him alone to break ground for him and to do his work on earth, to break wicked generational curses and so much more. And that he would turn all those generational curses and the curses of Deuteronomy into rich, fulfilling generational blessings. And he said they never treated me like a daughter. They never were really happy for me. They always held me down in some way and back. And even if it was passive aggressiveness, they made themselves into a delusion, and continued to use me for their own image and namesake. So I ended up, when I was 18, writing them a letter, told them if they ever got a hold of me again, it would be the last mistake of their lives. So then everybody falls apart in my family, turns on each other when I told everybody the truth and things that I knew would make them turn on each other. I just wanted to be with God and get away, and everybody still prevented me from doing that on some level. But they really did a number on my father. They have a lot of files on him and kept tabs on him. So my family ends up mocking me, laughing at me, attacking me outside my house. Like I said, betraying me, grabbing me physically, throwing me in a car. My dad ends up convincing me that he would have never done those things if he wasn't on drugs or wasn't coerced or wasn't under influence, or he'd say, I don't remember. So with the memory wipes, I had mercy on him. God had mercy on them too, but it was only for a time and a season. He ends up taking my brother in a car. He ends up lying to my face. I'm in the car with a suit. They pretend to go to all these places that I had mapped out because I had total recall back then too. Because what happened is that my brother and me, we went back, we retraced our steps, we remembered everything. We were going to go, we were going to have our own lives, but they stopped us from doing that. And the betrayal runs really deep because, like I said, it was like having my brain screwed shut again, like a well-sealed canning jar, while I was in the back seat of this car with the handlers again. So then my dad and my brother come back in the car. They said, oh, yeah, we went to all those places. There's nothing there, blah, blah, blah. Just a lot more mind games. So I go to court after I was going to go to court before this happened. God showed me the angelic name I was to bear and have liberty and freedom in, what he wanted to call me. My family stopped me from filing complaints at the police station. I went back into stiffness, rigidness, silencing. And then I'm up in the therapist's office looking out at the snow and telling this guy that everything was just great. I loved everyone, loved my family. I just made all those stories up, blah, blah, blah. So I just sank back into oblivion eventually. I ended up drinking after that, getting depressed because I was still under their control. The state forced me to live with them. Probation officer forced me to live with them. They always made the preemptive moves to keep me there, have a watchful eye, keep me under their control. My father's worst fear was losing control of my life because he's a control freak and because his appearance meant more to him than I ever did. But back down in the Ozarks, another thing with the hillbilly altars that they had is that my mom would always tell me to smile at the camera and just really creepily she'd say chicken fat. This was a reminder of referencing to how in their hillbilly altars they called my thighs chicken thighs when I was fighting them in this camper, and they were like pretending to eat my legs or something. These were crazy altars that they were in, and it was like they were possessed in these altars. I hated them for this. So what I ended up doing is I ended up going back, retracing all my steps. I go back to Grand Cave State Park. The guy that worked there, I got a joint from. I sat on a bench. I smoked the joint. I told everybody everything I wanted to say in the family. I had a phone back then even. My sister was going to help me, but then the next time I talked to her, of course, she'd be an altar, and then she'd be mean and nasty, whereas the previous times I had talked to her before, she'd comfort me and tell me how bad they were to her too. And so like it was a yo-yo relationship with everybody. But everyone unraveled. We got into fighting. We got intercepted. Another thing, I'm kind of zigzagging here, but back at the Hercules Forest, I'd have to describe how these woods were. They were like a maze. They took us a while to master all them. They had us like training on these motorcycles, on these bikes. And they'd have us out like biking for hours. I'd go do errands in the next village, go to the gas station. And sometimes I try to buy a camera and send myself a letter or a picture, but usually that would get intercepted. And every pictorial image of where we were was like erased from us, taken from us. And it seemed like a dream each time we went home. And then we'd go to this tower in the morning. We'd climb the tower, we'd eat. That Willie guy would be in the cement building underneath the tower, sitting in the air conditioning in the corner. And you could see like his eyes were reptilian. He had paperwork on the table by the door. But he started being weak. Like, he didn't seem to be functioning sometimes correctly. Like, he was on adrenochrome or drugs or something. Because a lot of people were taking that. And sometimes I couldn't tell the difference if it was drugs or adrenochrome, actually. But I saw he was like this pathetic, weak man that needed to be put out of his misery, just like my father was. He tried to be tough on the outside, but was like jello on the inside, always caving in. Because these people, no matter what they do, are weak. They don't have salvation. They're the ones who the Lord says, their works are as filthy rags to me. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. In the glades, what we do is we climb this tower. I didn't trust anybody at this point, but I made it to the top. My brother pushed me at the top a little bit. I remember screaming, but then I realized like how amazing this view was, because it looked like we were in like the land of Zelda. There was these peaks and mounds and trails that we'd see, and we'd take our dirt bikes or four-wheelers out. And I never wanted to go past the entrance point with my father. Every time I went there, I just like, because it had this box that said, fill out this form in case you get lost so we can find you. There's like no signs anywhere in this lush, dense forest. So I just stand there and I'd say like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to see a bear. And then he'd just have to like 3 times get me to go down the trail with him and yell at me, because it felt like it would be a trail of no return. And it was like amnesia each time I went into one of these trails. Like, I'd be stuck there for weeks. Like, they had us running and doing 30-mile obstacle courses back there. I'd sit in creeks by myself a lot of times, counting time or the birds or nature or clouds to stay sane and talk to myself. We'd go past certain points of stone tables also, where this guy in this baseball cap was sharpening knives. And we'd have to knife combat him, and then be put in these chokeholds. And at this point is when I saw like this green reptilian scale manifest from my father's neck, and that I knew that he was infested with demons. So these tests they put us through there, we'd have to pass everything perfectly or they'd rape you. I'd sit on this large rectangular looking stone. They'd take pictures of me. One time they put this big black wig on me for some reason. I remember riding dirt bikes out there all the time. I go to the village once that was about 25 miles away from there. I ran out of gas in front of the dirt driveway. But this was a divine appointment, I believe, because this place was a huge church and school complex. And this guy comes up to me, asks me what's wrong. He ends up putting gas in my tank. And then he asked me what my name was, where I was from. And of course, I'm programmed not to tell him anything. I couldn't tell him anything. And then he just asked me, like, are you okay? Like, do you need prayer for anything? He says. So I let him pray for me, even though I couldn't tell him where I was going, where I was from, or my name, because I had to get back at a certain time, and there's a certain trail where they were camped at. So that prayer was a blessing for me that day. And I'm glad that I ran into certain people and instances in those situations. So they had us in a yellow tent on Blair Ridge Road. They had me in this black wig, and they tell you what to do. So I'd go into this camp at night with a white pajama gown on, and I'd freak out the boys that were there. And for some reason, I'd hardly be able to talk because they had done some sort of trauma in front of me in the woods. There was a witch there that was doing it. These people, they would just come up with all kinds of things to do to you, and they were pure evil. Like, the witch that was there told me that I was the Blair Witch, and they were like, oh, she's the Blair Witch, and they'd start laughing at me when I walked into the camp. And this was the real making of the Blair Witch Project, because 2 of the boys were from the UK that were there, and that was Cass Bolts and Dave Morrow. And then up on the ridges, there'd be UFO activity sometimes, crafts, strange noises that also make you rage out in the woods, trigger certain things. They literally put you through hell out there. They had this red fire tower. They said there was this guy with a rifle up there watching us. So I'd get to this trail point and I'd hide behind this tree so he couldn't see me. And the good thing about photographic memory is that I can burn images of certain trees or certain things into my memory. And if I come in contact with them, it's just amazing how total recall happens. So I'd stop at certain points. I'd catch a breath. I'd use nature to heal me instead of hurt me. And I just kept focusing on God, who I was, how I was going to be when I got out of here, what I was going to do, my dreams, my future. I'd use the solitude and solace to make my own plans while acting out what they wanted me to do at the same time, in the meantime. And I had a bike ride in the morning on this glade top trail, and my brother would pull up beside me with his bike, and then we'd stare out at the sunrise and this fog that was all over the valley. And I'd say, oh, it's beautiful, and like we're in some sort of like Stockholm syndrome. And then he'd just look at me, because I was trying to stay positive through all this. Sometimes we'd stand there and actually talk about how fucked up our life was and our situations and how we were going to get out of there. Like, we try to rationalize and make sense of why we were at certain places and these trips, even though our subconscious knew that nothing of this really made any sense. But he was just like, when I said, oh, the fog is beautiful, I remember him looking over at me and he's like, it's just fog. And then I usually get angry. But a lot of these situations are very surreal to imagine unless you're in them and in like a state of Stockholm. This place also had a lot of waterfalls. It actually had some beautiful scenery. It was refreshing. But then we'd get like triggered back into mind control if we enjoyed some of this beauty by these two assholes mainly. And then they'd just be staring at you with clipboards, looking down at you when you're in your swimsuits, telling you what to do and breaking your moment of freedom and clarity usually. Another time I was brought to a place called Prayer Mountain. I met a trainer on a bridge with my bike. He threw it in the back of his red truck. At that point, that happened right after the Blair Witch Project night, and it seemed like I just felt like it was like possessing me. And he said, oh, I know someone who could help with that situation. So I get taken to this place. I still don't even know why they took me there, but I'm sitting on this couch, on this leather couch, and I see this creepy looking plasticky woman with dark hair and this man beside her that was just intensely staring at me with like dragon eyes and this crazy smile on his face. So then his eyes I see like shift up and down and turn into stone for a second. And I knew what they were, of course. And then he tries to ask me to a bedroom upstairs and tries laying hands on me when I was sitting at the edge of the bed and talking to me. And in my mind, I am rebuking him. I was on the couch like prior to this, just feeling spiritually attacked by these people. This was Kenneth Copeland, and I don't know who the woman was. Could have been Miss Byers. But I remember he stood up from his couch, and I just felt like my whole head was attacked. My head was just spinning. I jerked my head up and my body, and I moved by the door, and I was literally on the floor trying to get out of the door. And then I was outside on this dirt trail trying to run away because this place has like sand hills and rocks in the backyard, and it's like a compound with fences and horses. So he's outside calling my name, looking for me. Then I get in Willie's truck and I end up leaving notes about Willie. I went and I made like 100 copies of this note with his name and address on it. And I put it in everyone's mailbox in town. So in those moments of like escapism and revenge, I tried to do as much damage as I could. And on this note that I handed out to everybody in the town, I wrote like, the police won't help me. Other times when I go back down to Rockaway Beach, I'd be in different houses too. One man's house I was at, if you look at it from an aerial view, it looks like a dog's face. The nicer houses were always at the ends of the lakes and not in the town so much. I was also threatened to have to stay there for winter once. I'd be memory erased on this certain boat dock, sitting on a guy's lap looking out at the water with the same code words and the same things said each time. All the mental pictures of all the lakes and houses and bridges would just get shuffled and buried in your mind. Um, and there was also 2 bridges in Forsyth, and then they took one of the walking bridges down. So you look at old pictures, new pictures, and things kind of come together. That makes sense. But one time I actually tried walking out of the town of Forsyth, and I was pulled over and picked up and asked questions by one of the guys whose houses I was staying at. So then I just remember I was acting and pretending like I was just going on a walk. I didn't know what my name was. So then they would kind of take me back and know it was me and not be mad. So you'd be acting a lot, even if you weren't an altar. And sometimes those were even scarier situations because you wouldn't know what would happen if they found out that you were acting. I was also taken to the Butterfly Mansion. The man who took me there was a golfer and drinking. He's taking pictures of me in there. He ended up buying me this big collage of glass butterflies in this case. And then when I started acting up back at his house, he smashed the case of butterflies in front of me with a hammer to instill monarch butterfly programming. So what I would do is I'd just try not to cry. You'd shift pain out as soon as you could, and then it just gets easier to go into altar and just act like life is peachy and go along with the flow and pretend like you weren't really kidnapped. So I'd be brought to the best golf courses in all the areas. I ended up just kind of giving in, having fun, acting like the life of the party, like life was beautiful. And this happened after they traumatized me at Murder Rocks Trail. Because some part of me, I thought it was going to be easier just to get drunk with them and go along with them and make them, I don't know, I guess make them like me, like as the funniest person there. And then just thinking that I was having a blast. But just like evil operates, they too were laughing at me, not only behind my back, but in front of my back too. Murder Rocks Trail was this trail behind the Murder Rocks golf course back then. And they tried to get me to accept the spirit of murder there. They took me by the open pit area where you look into this deep pit and it looks black when you look down in there. And I didn't want to die or be thrown in it. So I ended up going along with their murderous schemes on the golf courses, also hiding their secrets and witnessing certain unpleasant things. Then my dad ends up going to this Murder Rocks trail once too. He's standing over there and he's screaming about the Murder Rocks because he saw a sign that said Murder Rocks and he thought it was funny. So I just remember looking at him like he was crazy. I'd be flown out of the Branson airport. There'd be 2 men standing behind me in a black car parked in the back of the parking lot of the airport. And then I would wake up eventually or pretend like I was waking up in altar. And the driver would be in the front. And I eventually pretended to be turned on and off and shut down and put to sleep and woken up. I flew home on my own once I was old enough. And this airport also went to Montauk. So I wouldn't be surprised if Montauk Downs golf course was also connected to this whole ring that also has mafia ties. And a couple guys were called Johnny. So it was like, oh, here comes Johnny. My dad, some reason, he thought like the torment was funny. He laughed at my pain. He'd always tell me to be strong. He seemed demented at times. And I thought maybe he was acting like them to make it easier on us, but that actually never happened. He just sold us out, also tormented us in cars when we were little, just like my grandfather did. I mean, it was really like he was no different than them. He knew everything that happened to us and did nothing about it. He just protected himself. It was like an underlying psychopath that had free reign to do whatever he wanted to us. And then they shut down his altars eventually and parts of him so that he appeared normal. And then we just acted like a normal family. No child should have been in his hands or my mom's hands. And they're still all repressed now. But those parts that were shut down, I know are still dormant. And I believe those parts still torment their thoughts. So these golfers, they take me different places, and then they'd have my dad take me to the same place to try to overlap the initial memory as being like you're being on a normal vacation. But I saw through that, and that's how they do screen memories each time, because you cut through that with the Sword of the Spirit, the screen, and you know that it was a dual event. My mom and eventually started talking to my older brothers about our constant trips to Missouri, and they started getting curious. They'd look at us funny, like when we come in the door and say, like, "What's going on with Missouri again?" Like laugh and roll their eyes because it's like we were there every weekend or something. And I would drive there myself sometimes, and I was getting marijuana from there too. It was like I was contracted out there or something, and they grew suspicious. My mom was complaining about it to them. An intervention happened from high up the line because they kept tabs on all of us. And I was utilizing the airport. One time my dad even drove back home by himself. I flew back in the airport. I go in the house and I look at him like, haha, I won. I got here sooner or something. But by the time that he got back home, he just had a blank look on his face with no response whatsoever. Like he had forgotten. And at this point, one of my older brothers even too walked past me and said, like, how can you even stand to be around him? So there was moments where people were like half awake or were temporarily awake, and then we just kind of like go awake and back to sleep. A lot of shuffling and switching. And then it's like just nobody ever mentioned Missouri again after I was 19. One time down by Branson, I had my money taken away from one of the golf resorts. And the thing with the golf resorts is that the high class ones, they could bring girls in, nobody would ever know. They have private flights, and it's, you know, a game of the rich. Like a lot of normal people just, they don't even care about golf. They don't know what goes on with all these resorts and clubs and secret societies and stuff. A lot of things can happen with golf resorts. So I get my money taken away. I go back into this mansion to get my money because they'd always gypped me out of my money. I'd even try to hide my money before I got like my altar shut down, and then I would be back at home and half consciousness try to look for my money, and I'd be like, damn it, they took my money again. Like I didn't know how they were taking my money when I knew that I had hidden it somewhere. So a lot of little games went on like that where you try to get better at it each time. So I ran back into this mansion. You got to punch in a code at the end. I remember it. And there's like cross wooden fences. I'm running alongside the fence to down the driveway. I get my money, give my dad gas money to get home. My dad gets out of the car and he was standing there and he was getting messed with by two handlers. And I just wanted him to leave. I was calling him by his first name. One of the guys put a piece of wheat in his mouth, triggered the ultra howdy, of course. And he's like, oh, don't get all trigger happy now, howdy. They were laughing at him because my dad was getting mad at him. And then he reached for his gun, and then he like looked down and he realized that he had no gun. So they played a lot of mind games with him like that too. And then he like plucked the piece of wheat out of his mouth and threw it and looked perplexed and kind of snapped out of altar at that moment. In these golf resorts, I'd be in sun hats overlooking these balconies, overlooking beautiful, pristine golf resorts and these scenes. And eventually I saw through it was like too glossed over for me to look at genuinely as programming kept breaking. And I saw it as just illusions and enchantments after a while because it was all crooked and the money was crooked. It had seeds of corruption sown into it everywhere. It had blood money into it. I didn't feel right after each place I went to. And then when I'd shift out of altar. These people are gluttonous. The veneer just lost its touch and sway over me. I didn't want to be around these people, around secret psychopaths, murderers, pedophiles, liars, cheats, and their little round tables and clubs. It's too much secrecy, too many sickled men, and it's just emptiness that is overcast on all of them. And they just try to keep you on a leash. They have a sick sense of humor, most of these people. I mean, they're literally like play a trick on you and like fly you to one place when you wanted to go somewhere else just to make fun of you. But then if you get hurtful feelings or something, then they act like they care about you. So it's always like this inner hatred towards them, but still having to play their game. So these people, they're just trying to fill holes in their spiritual sickness by consuming as much as they could, showing off to each other, outdoing each other. Millionaires sometimes can be the worst people. Not always, but they can abuse power, think they can openly mock anyone, including God, which is a lie that they'll have to own up to and pay the consequences for eventually. Because the one time they told me I could see a castle looking home on one golf course, and then they flew me in a helicopter to an abandoned castle ruin spot for fun at another place, just to get me irate. The amount of money they make, the free reign they have is sickening. The money that they make off of MK Ultra slaves is staggering. And I found very few people in these families that ever actually did care about me. Maybe one or two that even understood your situation, weren't hell-bent on protecting the families, and genuinely like would spend time with you, knew who your real name was, what your own purpose was, what you wanted in life. The rest of it is just mainly Babylonian spell magic. Because the woman that came to our house, okay, she comes to our house, she's looking at my dad across the kitchen table and all of us. She went through, and he was in a trance first. She had a silver hand watch in her hand, but it had the sigil on it when I looked over at it. And she tried to keep me from looking over at it, but I broke through that anyways. And it was just a demon sigil of whatever they programmed for Captain Howdy Hands into him. Whatever compartmentalization, program multiple she had in her little folder. So when she was shutting him down, his face starts twisting. He's literally growling about it. And she's telling him, like, you can look, you can sniff, but you can't touch or harm, and other commands, kind of breaking him down gently. Because after that, like, my father would still play like a mousy game with us and other weird behaviors that he had, would growl and sniff us, but changed slightly after that day when she shut down parts of him. And I resented her for not taking away that whole altar completely, because he'd still play monster, smell you, but then it's like he would stop and change his mood and behavior and then walk away and do something else. But dormant, those are still under the surface. The real game was that what he would do when we were little is he would have this red vial of adrenochrome in the laundry room that my grandfather would give him. He'd be programmed to take it at a certain time. He'd look at the clock. He'd look like a zombie. I'd be in like this red nightgown, jumping up and down, like terrified, start screaming like, no, before I knew what was going to happen. And then he'd just like laugh at you. He'd look over at you. He'd get the devil in his eyes. He'd put a dropper by his tongue, stick out his tongue and look at you like it was time. And then he'd pull your body close to his armpit and pretend he was like going to put the dropper in your mouth, and you'd have to squirm away from him. And then when he got the adrenochrome rush on his tongue, then all the lights would be turned off, and he would just start like violently shaking the washing machine with both hands really fast, and he'd start growling really deeply, and then it would get louder and louder and louder, and then it just like ricocheted through the whole house. Then he'd get on all fours, get louder, insanely louder, find you crawling away from him somewhere in the dark, and then he'd attack you and like bite your bones, growl at your face, rape you. He'd get his thick leather belt around your neck and tighten it, or just choke you until you almost pass out. And I did pass out once. And then he'd get worse if you would try to move away. So sometimes I just played dead to get it over with. My mom would turn the lights on or off, or my brother would be in charge of turning the lights on or off. And then my mom would sit in a chair and look at me while I was looking right at her being choked to death with a leather belt. And I looked right into her eye, and she'd have like just a dazed look on her face and say like, oh, that's enough. Or she'd skirt her legs away from you if you tried to reach your hand out and grab her for help. And I'm sure she had seen and been conditioned to a lot of these games even when she was a child, so it doesn't surprise me. So after this, I'd go crawl away into a hole somewhere and feel like dying, because I'd literally be grabbing for my mom's legs, crawling in the dark or the lights on, try to look at her, begging her for help. She'd move away from me. Nobody ever helped us. It's like you were bothering somebody when they were in that trance. My brother would be frozen with his finger on the light switch in the dining room. They had him so frozen, it just broke my heart, even looking at his eyes. Because sometimes he'd get the courage to turn on the light sooner, no matter how much the insanity echoed through our house in these sessions. And then he'd open the door for me to crawl through out onto the porch sometimes, and I'd like escape and run and just go out into the woods or something. Or sometimes my dad would lock me outside till nighttime. But sometimes if my dad would attack my brother or my mom instead if I did get away. And it was like a relief to get away from their insanity. So what they ended up doing, they just told everyone else I was insane. They did reverse psychology, never admitted what their alters were doing. Each one of us in my family had alters, so no one could really trust each other ever because of that too, which is sad. And I had arm pain for about 10 years, and I always felt like someone was twisting my arm from the inside. And this was a spiritual knot that I removed in a deliverance session. It was because my father always held my arms back behind my back. So when the monster game started, I'd drop to the ground. When he'd hurt me in the dark in the living room, I'd get one arm out so I could hold on to the belt that was around my neck, and then the other arm would painfully twist behind my back. He'd tell me to put my arm behind my back in a lot of pictures too. And then my face would get like bright red with embarrassment. And then I'd put my right arm behind my back in poses. And what it was like, it's like my grandfather and my father had rotating shifts of torturing us. And like 1 week, one would do it. And then the next week, the other one would do it. So me and my brother started helping each other defeat the altar called monster as we grew older and overcome him. And we were very strong as kids, but it took us a while, probably by age like 13. But it was his favorite game, hunting and strangling his own children on the floor. He'd also take you on like midnight walks with a gun through the woods and had all these different behaviors. And I don't know how anybody couldn't have noticed that there was something seriously wrong with him. But the demon was still active somewhere deep down. It just wasn't as afraid of him anymore. And of course, he'd tell you he was sorry when he was in his normal personality if things really did get brought up. But all of it was lies. And you have a hard time picking the pieces up again without the help of God's love and light and truth that pierces through any of these illusions. Because you can become spotless and blameless through deliverance. God's the source of all truth, and he's been so, so good and faithful. One man I went on motorcycle rides with in Highlandville, and these were moments away from handlers, like for a day where it was like someone was babysitting me, somebody else would drop me off somewhere. I was like shuffled around, and I had certain opportunities to be myself. And if you're truly from a CIA mind-controlled family, dynamics are very hard and complicated, and there's just no easy way to deal with it and each other without help from on high. And my only advice is just to give it up to the Lord, who you should have in your life, if any of them, or if any of them are even redeemable. Otherwise, a lot of family members just keep hurting you, even if it's unintentional. Because they're like well-sealed lids like I was, or they start unraveling. They have many guises of what's good for everyone. But my handlers told me that they told me many lies because they knew that I was the most awake one. So I had to consent to a lot of things to make it stick and work with the rest of my family because I was the awake one. They saw us as like a family that they needed to deal with and put back to sleep constantly. Because I believe they would have killed my father if we didn't keep up our act. I was told many things because of all his involvement and with his alien involvement that lasted for decades. And protecting a family like this was a mistake. And the Lord showed me that even in the time after, it was like a period of grace and mercy with them. I tried to live out a distant, somewhat normal relationship. It just never worked. You have this underlying hatred when sin isn't dealt with because you can erase memories, but you can't erase sin. Them being in my life was only for a short while. It was like a coerced protection from the people telling me lies and more bearing of the truth. It's a dysfunction that's always going to be there without deliverance. And I've sacrificed and forgiven way beyond what I ever even needed to or what was required of me. And I saved my father and protected him in situations where I never even needed to. He never saved me once or protected me once. He cared about our numbers, what they told him we were doing, impressing them. I mean, they literally gave him paperwork and he was on their side. He threw me to the wolves and was as entertained as they were. That's not family and that's not love. There never was love there. It was a convincing of each other that we loved each other. But all you have to do is scratch the surface a little and it's pretty clear in the spirit what the masks are and who they are. I mean, letting your wife get drugged by various different people all the time, it's shameful and disgraceful. The state, made me live with them. They were hard to get away from, and their vampiric energy. They were cruel. They were heartless. And I realized that even as a child, I was stronger spiritually in all my encounters than all of the adults that I was around. So we end up at Grand Cave State Park. We had a camp spot at KAN-Do campground, and I rode my bike around. My dad was given the details by the park ranger, what was going to happen. And I kept saying, like, on my bike, I can do it, psyching myself up. The leader of this alien hunt game ends up being this orangish, tall, gray alien that was difficult to take out. They were getting flushed out by the flooding and coming up through the cave systems. I end up taking out this orangish gray alien in his forehead with a spear, and all the other grays that followed him. So my dad and the leader of this project, they had us out on like this weird Ozark alien cave hunt, and you could hear them like laughing up on a ridge. And we were on this trail that was called the Louter Trail, and they were screaming like louder, louder, and laughing because it sounded like the trail we were on. And you could hear these alien screams through this valley getting louder and louder. And I don't know how many we killed and buried. It seemed like it was like a world record or something in total. But this park ranger, I don't even know if he was a real one, but we get to this campground. He makes us park away from all the campers in this last spot away from everybody. My mom's upset because she's like, why the heck are we even here? We're in the middle of nowhere. She doesn't know what to do with herself. That guy goes in the camper, deals with her, which meant putting her to sleep, filling her head with lies. They had fireworks going off all night at the campground. Me and my brother end up riding to the cave, to the gate. The guy comes to the gate with my father. We're playing earlier in the day at the cave and through the park. We'd hang off this cave and then jump down to the ground because it really wasn't that high up. So we go to the gate at sunset a little beforehand. We set up this tent by the Louder River Trail, and I was timed with a timer with this guy who has a stopwatch on, like how fast you could go through each trail, and try to do that in half time each time. So I put on tennis shoes in the morning, I put my hair in a ponytail, I'd look in the mirror, and I'd psych myself up and go. And I would stop on these trails. I'd feel a presence and turn around. There'd be like this little gray on one trail just staring at you. And when it would start walking up to you, you'd feel like your heart was getting crushed because its eyes would bulge out. When it locks eyes with you, then it's on, like right there. They come out of nowhere, they're silent, and they start hissing at you. And these things are like rotten and evil at the core because it's a demon in the body that tries to get into your head immediately. So you have to make your forehead strong against their foreheads right away. It's your first line of defense. And these ones were the worst ones I've ever seen. They were a little taller than average. You could fight them like with a stick and with your mind, but the thing that hurt them the most was throwing them in this crystal clear flowing water from the creek that was just rushing because of the flooding. So I'd throw them in the creek and they'd like freak out and scream. When I ran, I'd be stalked by them. They'd like just come out of the bush or a couple miles down a path. And then the night that we pitched our tent, my dad was like getting me ready. Like he was rubbing my arms, acting like it was like a fun sporting event and saying like, "Ooh, can you hear him out there?" And told me to be strong, go get him, like it was a marathon or something. And we had a few weapons, and we called these the Screamo fight nights. Because the tall orange gray alien we called Screamo. So you could hear down in the valley all these screams down by the creek. It sounded like metal on chalkboards, and they had these hideous screams that just echoed in the dark woods. Because nobody went to this place. It's like literally an hour of Cookville. Nothing. It's like a twilight zone. This place was secluded. You'd get cobwebs literally running through the trails each time too. That's how secluded it was. So down in the valley, when night came, I heard them rustling somewhere in the woods, and there was UFO activity too. You could see like zoop, zoop. You could hear the crafts come in. It's a very mysterious place. An orange light would come down through the trees. Zoop, it would drop one off. Another, it was like a factory dropping off. Each time you killed one, another one would just pop right back up. And they'd pick up the body. So you'd hear all these screams, follow the screams. There's dark presences everywhere. I just hated these things. It was like me and my brother were trying to herd them together in this hunting game or kill them, or whoever like got the most won and set the world record or something. But I've always had these night terrors about this dark open cave and this gray climbing out of the floor of the cave with bones that were coming up out of it that it had collected possibly from humans. And then I'm like battling with this thing that's standing on the other side of this cave. But it turns out it was real. Go back to this place. What happened is that my father was behind me in this cave at night. I thought he was just joking at first, telling us about these aliens in this cave. My father's behind me, holding me back so that the gray could come up close to me and fully frighten me until like the last minute. I thought it would get me, and then he'd let me go to deal with it because he loved you to be scared. It thrilled him. I thought he was joking at first, luring us into the alien cave, but then he sticks my head close to the hole in the ground, and then this gray starts reaching up from it in this liquid, and then he pushes me down close to its head and firmly with his hands on my shoulders walks me back slowly, step by step, as this gray is walking one step closer and closer to me. So that shows my dad's full of evil desires, because my body was like shaking through this. And it's like him rewinding the worst scenes in a horror movie, because he'd make you sit in the dark with him and rewind scenes and tell you in your ear, like, watch it closely until the scene was over. The gray was coming in and out from these underground open hole systems. They're like filthy creatures. They can be cave dwelling. The military can make a body. The demon goes into another body just like a factory. They're like gross, belching, farting, walking demon suits with 3 fingers, and they stink. And then we ended up, after this hunt, we ended up cementing the floor down, putting tires and sand on the floor areas, and then getting it shut so that no one could go inside the cave anymore. Then they put a steel fence around it and padlocked it. And I remember I was in there shoveling sand over this new floor and whatever else was covered up in there. It had stashed away, I don't know, they probably stashed away children, or I don't know what they had in there, but it was a lot in that cave hole system. Another time, I remember waking up in a new red truck with my handler going back up to the cave. I was weak. I was drained. He has his hand on my leg. We go up to the gate. He opens the gate of the cave fence, and then we buried some more stuff in there. Then he puts this brick cement wall on the corner of the floor for some reason. And before all this, what he did is this park ranger goes into the camper with my mother, convincing her that we were working there. Yeah, as if 10-year-old kids would be working in a park. So he tells her the story that we're like digging a pipe or something. So he drives her around down by where we're at, and I saw her waving to us in his truck, and she saw us outside with shovels. And my dad was happy because his lie worked. And I remember I threw my shovel down. I felt bad for lying to my mother. And then my dad tells me, like, oh, stop, come on. He's like always minimizing, patronizing anything, invalidating any feelings, anything you ever say, because he's a pathological liar that we never had any respect for. And we grew up hating him. So we would manipulate my mother in these games and stuff. And she thought we were like getting paid $10 an hour or something in this park. So she's in this truck waving at us. Then she goes back to the camper. He takes her to town. We eventually come up with more lies to tell her. I mean, this woman could have been like drugged and raped all these times that we left her with strange people, strange men. So my father shifts blame to her in perception. So everybody thinks that she's crazy with what comes out of her memory and mind and talks about. And these things just keep continuing. And it's like she's a little broken pet. Later on in this episode, I know we were there at least a few days. I'm in this building again. My dad's sitting in a chair across from me. This gray comes walking right in the room. It's like an office. And he grabs a can of Coke, slams it, and then he starts shaking and just belches this strange, loud, like long shaking belch. And me and my dad are sitting across from each other with big eyes, trying not to laugh really hard. Because if you make them mad, they like flip their head at you and start walking towards you and hissing at you, or attacking your heart. And I could repel them and their strange moves to get into your mind. Now Coca-Cola has fetal tissue cells and E. coli, so I think they like that. I mean, they can even drink Drano, so its mouth would make this oval shape and it would like look up as if to say like, ooh, first, and then it would shake fiercely and start belching. And it was echoing everywhere how they belch. And then it would walk outside the door would slam behind it, and it'd be like mumbling these crazy noises like it was disoriented or drunk and about to stumble and fall. So I'd go outside. I love messing with these things and kicking them when they were vulnerable. And then I'd run back into the building and slam the door and lock it. But you could hear it just stumbling down the trail, the dirt trail, like blah, 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 like chirping noises, half broken sentences. The Coca-Cola made him like drunk. My dad was vulnerable to their mind attacks, so I'd shield him from them sometimes. And then the gray would stumble back down the hill and down the trail, and its echoes would just disappear then. And what I had done also at this place was I had my brother take a picture of me standing on top of the cave when a gray was actually peeking out from behind me, standing there on the trail, because I knew the certain spots that they would stalk me and stop at when I turn around. So that's one of the pictures that got burned, because I was really proud of that picture. And so many others, but no one was at this park. And I'm thinking, like, when this alien comes in, just grabs the Coke can, like, well, I guess it really doesn't matter. Park's closed. The park ranger ends up like putting a gun to my dad's head to get me to sacrifice more time or comply, whatever the situation was. But it didn't work this time because he'd done this before. Then we're taken outside, standing in a line. I remember getting debriefed, our memories wiped. It's just these tools that they use, and inculcation bars. I see this gray alien walking in front of me. Also, another time on this wet, stony path in the woods. I'd get traumatized or raped by the certain tree. I'd feel drugged. I feel the rocks crushing my knees. So when the alien would come up out of the bush while you were having a trauma done to you, it was hard to rebuke the alien because they would take that opportunity to mess with your mind and try to get into your mind when you were in a state of attack. So I'd be battling somebody behind me doing something to me and a gray alien trying to advance in front of me. And the gray alien, if they do get in your mind, they can make you think that the person behind you is somebody else. They can try to erase your memory while staring at you with those black eyes. They can try to make you hear things, see things. They literally would jump out from hiding while you're being abused and try to access you then. So you have to fight them at that moment, no matter what's going on to your own body. So I end up kicking this gray in the creek. I threw it in the water. I kicked it right in the back, threw it in the water, and it's like freaking out in the water because its water is cleansing and rushing spring water. So we tried drowning them in the water because they hated it so much. And they live in filth and human secretions that they stole underground somewhere or in a craft, because a lot of these things are manufactured. So a lot of them died in the water in the creek. If they succeeded, sometimes they'd let me and my dad go. I also remember yelling at my dad once as he's holding my arms up and we're walking back to the campground, telling me to be strong when we're following this path back to our camper. And I'm like screaming at him, like, if you tell me to be strong one more time, I'm going to kill you. The last time they did this underground base scenario and would program you with specific dates and times for the next meeting, it would backfire though. Because my dad called these people just them, like there's some secret force that told my family what to do. We'd stand in line like soldiers. My dad would be first in line to get repressed. What God would do and help me in this situation, he'd put a film over my mind so I'd remember their evil and end up glorifying his name in the end for his purposes. Because the handler would want you to rage and trigger you so that the gray would come up to you and feed off of the energy. If you didn't focus on rebuking the gray, but if you just focused on your anger instead, that would be a weakness of yours. So you don't want them to get into your mind. If they do, they can make you, like I said, hear things, see things. It's almost like a holographic realm they can almost put you in. They mess with your mind and torment you with what's already in your own mind. That's why you don't want them getting access to your mind, because they'll bring out your deepest fears and use them against you. And they do this to disorient and confuse you in that moment so that you can't focus on rebuking them and sending their asses back to hell, which anyone who's walking in kingdom authority here has the power to do. They're just disgusting. And this gray that would come up out of the bushes or the trees while my handler would hold my arms behind my back on that stony gray trail by the creek, it would just come up out of the scenery just so like slimily and just stand right in front of me staring at me. And I'd be on my knees in a vulnerable position, so I'd be at the gray's eye level too. And this one in particular was very stubborn, and I fought with it before and had thrown it in the creek before because the water terrified them. They start squealing. But I loved it when I threw them in the water because it was like their screams weren't so scary anymore. And Screamo wasn't, because Screamo was the big orange one that would just stand in the same spot in the woods and like scream his head off. It just kept coming back. But I did manage to send that one off. They didn't get into my mind. After certain traumas, I'd be back in that building or a basement. The reptilian possessed handler, which was the park ranger at the time, was standing on my left. Okay, I'm trying with one hand